everybody, and welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and my guest tonight is Michelle May, MD. She is a recovered yo-yo dieter and the founder of Am I Hungry? Mindful Eating Programs and Training at www.amihungry.com that guides individuals to resolve mindless and emotional eating and senseless yo-yo dieting to live the vibrant life they crave. She has trained over 500 health professionals to facilitate Am I Hungry programs worldwide. Dr. May is the award-winning author of the book series Eat What You Love What You Eat, that teaches mindful eating for yo-yo dieting, diabetes, bariatric surgery, and binge eating. Her newest book is Eat What You Love What You Eat for students. So please welcome Dr. Michelle May. Thank you so much. I've been really excited about talking to you.
Me too, Chef AJ. Great to be on with you. And feel free to call me Michelle.
Oh, okay. Well, it's all right. Okay. I will call you Michelle, and feel free to call me AJ. So
okay.
I loved your book because I was someone who was formerly obese, and I've been slender now for 3 years, and I think I eat pretty well and I exercise pretty well. But this last piece of the puzzle, the mindful eating, boy, I sure need to learn, and I don't do it. And I actually do the opposite. I do the mindless eating, and not so much that I'm eating foods that I'm not aware of. It's not like I'm overeating, but I do everything wrong. I eat in front of the TV, I eat in front of the computer, I eat in the car, and I eat standing up. And if you can give me any tips and tricks on how not to do it, I would love you forever. But first, why don't you just explain to our listeners, what is mindful eating? Because I know what mindless eating is because I've interviewed Brian Wansink, who wrote the book Mindless Eating. But what is mindful eating, and why is it so important?
Well, it's important because awareness is the first step to change. So just the fact that you're aware of some of these habits, and in fact, there's probably many others that you may or may not be aware of yet, but we'll get there. The awareness that you have can really create positive change. I like a very simple definition of mindful eating: eating with intention and attention.
That's
in
great.
other words, it's eating with purpose and awareness. And that purpose piece, that intention piece, makes all the difference in the world.
I remember reading that in your book. And so why do you feel it is important? Because it's not something that I think most people do, especially, ever since the drive-through. I think that was probably the start of it, the drive-through.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of things that contribute to mindless eating, as Brian has studied and taught us about. I'll tell you that I think many people, when they hear the phrase mindful eating or perhaps just read something on the internet about it, oftentimes they're looking at one very narrow piece of mindful eating, which is savoring food, noticing food, eating without distraction. And those are very important. But with our approach at Am I Hungry, we really look at the entire decision-making process around food and try to increase awareness about why am I eating? When do I feel like eating? What do I choose? How do I eat it? How much of it do I eat? And then ultimately, where do I invest the energy that I've consumed? Those 6 decision points are part of what I call the mindful eating cycle. And awareness of each of those decision points has the power to literally change our relationship with food.
I think it's so interesting because you call the subtitle of your book, Eat What You Love What You Eat, How to Break Your Eat, Repent, Repeat Cycle. And I really like that. I really like that phrase, because that's what so many people seem to do.
Yeah, and if I could just expand on that, the reason that that's such a big challenge for so many of us, and like you, I also struggled. I struggled for many, many years, from the time I was a young teenager to high school, college, medical school, and even into my practice. So this is really a topic that's born out of personal passion, as I know it is for you. And here's the thing. I call myself a recovered yo-yo dieter. Mm-hmm. Well, yo-yo dieting is a really good description of what the challenge is, because for most of us, we're either wound up tight, following all the rules, being good on our diet, or we're unraveling back down toward the bottom. Okay, forget it. I can't do it anymore. So we're on the diet, off the diet, getting ready for the cruise, on the cruise. And here's the problem. a yo-yo doesn't stop in the middle. It is either on its way up or on
right.
its way down.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
Right? It's the eat, repent, repeat cycle. So what mindful eating can do for us is it can move us away from this dichotomy of I'm either in control or I'm out of control. Mindful eating is really about being in charge. In other words, it is about being aware of the decisions that I'm making around food and eating and even physical activity, and then choosing what works best for me in that moment. And that's literally how we break the eat, repent, repeat cycle, is we stop trying to follow rules and we start learning internal ways of making decisions that don't leave us feeling deprived and hungry and craving the foods that somebody told us we shouldn't eat.
So many people don't eat out of response to hunger. And I mean, as a doctor or just a citizen of the United States, over 3/4 of Americans are overweight and more than half of those are obese now. And one of the things I loved about your book, Bess, because I took extensive notes, but you had this phrase and it said, if hunger doesn't tell you to start eating, what's going to tell you to stop? I thought that was just brilliant. That's probably my favorite line in the whole book because it's so true. Because if you're not eating because of hunger, then you're not going to stop because of fullness.
That's exactly right. We stop when the plate is clean, or we stop when the bag is empty. And if I could add to this, I don't really even think that the challenges that some people face with their weight is the primary problem. In fact, I think lots of people mindlessly eat who have no challenges with their weight. And of course, some people might be overweight and eat very mindfully. So that is potentially one symptom that somebody might have. But I think ultimately the reason to learn mindful eating is to improve your relationship with food. And here's why. We are spending so much time and energy thinking about food, thinking about eating, thinking about what we should eat, shouldn't eat, what we did eat, hiding the evidence, feeling guilty. And that's a real misuse of energy, in my opinion. I think that ultimately, yes, we want to eat a balanced, nutritious, energy-filled diet that leaves us feeling great. But eating, unless you're a professional chef or a mindful eating expert like you and I are, really eating should only be a small portion of your energy in each day. And what I find over and over again is that people are spending way too much of their time and energy thinking about food and eating when that should be a very natural decision-making process that we make easily.
Mm-hmm. I read somewhere, and I might have this statistic wrong, that Americans spend something like 800 times more than what is spent on world hunger relief, on diets and weight loss programs. And clearly it's not working because, I wondered, Michelle, how much do you think that the food has contributed to this problem? What I mean is, I wrote a book called Unprocessed, and I'm just not a fan of processed food. I'm a fan of real food. And there's been many books about how processed food is not helpful, how it's, sugar, fat, and salt, how the food giants hooked us by Michael Moss, The End of Overeating by Dr. David Kessler, that talks about how when processed food came to be, they put in more sugar, more fat, and salt than anybody would ever use at home to hijack our brain chemistry and addict us to this. How much of this problem do you think is because the food has changed so much and people aren't eating meals at home with their family and cooking food from scratch, but they're relying on so much takeout and boxed food that really isn't that healthy for us?
Well, I think what we eat is a piece of the puzzle, and I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. When I spoke earlier about the mindful eating cycle, what we eat is one of those decision points, but it's not the only decision point, and it really doesn't matter how healthy your diet is if you're eating when you're not hungry and you're not stopping when you're satisfied. So I would have to say that my personal opinion in this is that if we're continually pointing to the outside world, expecting the outside world to change, then we're going to be in trouble. So we take a very inside-out approach. This is really about decision-making. So now you don't know this perhaps, but my husband is also a professional chef. And
yes, I do, because he wrote the recipes in the book. I did read the book.
Yeah.
It was very good. Yes, and he wrote the recipes. So I do know that, actually. So that's
Yes,
great.
and and so it's easier when you have those skills, and I love what you're teaching people, because it takes a lot of skill to make foods that taste fabulous and that really nourish your body and taste delicious. And I think that that's a wonderful thing to do, and it's certainly something that I enjoy in my life, increasingly so. The longer I eat mindfully, the more I gravitate toward foods that are whole and closer to nature and all of those wonderful things. However, if I was to say to somebody, and this is just my area of interest, but if I was to say to somebody that the only thing you can eat or should eat is this kind of food, but that's not practical or available, or for any number of reasons they're not interested in eating like that, then they're kind of left out there. So I really prefer, for my area to work on, is this decision-making process around food and how we make decisions about when we eat and why we're eating, and begin to recognize that it's often why we're eating that drives our desire for certain types of foods and our desire to overeat those foods, right? So if we make food the enemy, if we make food the problem, then it causes people to say, oh, I'm addicted to sugar, I can't eat it. And yet the more they don't eat it and want it, the more out of control and powerless they tend to feel. And when they finally give into it, they overeat it because of all this resistance that's built up, and then they feel guilty, and so they want more, and then they say, see, I was addicted to sugar. When in fact part of the feelings that you get when you restrict and deprive is something that feels a bit like addiction, so you end up proving yourself right. So it's really hard to know which came first, the chicken or the egg, the belief that the food is bad, or the resistance, or what have you. And so we really like to see when people are able to make decisions about food, and they can eat those foods in moderation without feeling like they're out of control or binging on it, which is, of course, not healthy for anybody. So.
Well, I noticed that one of your books was specifically on binging, and I haven't read all your books. I have two of them. I haven't read the second one. I'm going to read the diabetes one. But is the approach the same, regardless whether it's for the students or for the diabetic or for the binger? Is it a similar approach that you're recommending, or do you tweak it a little bit differently for the different?
Yeah, it's definitely somewhat different. So what's common in all of the Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat books, and in all of our Am I Hungry mindful eating programs, the common thread is the mindful eating cycle. It's the decision-making process around why am I eating, when am I eating, what am I eating, how am I eating, how much am I eating, and where am I investing my energy. Those 6 decision points are woven through everything that we do, because they provide the necessary structure that really, when you think, gosh, I'm not going to diet anymore. We know diets don't work, but what am I going to do? Well, this mindful eating cycle provides that structure. It helps you see exactly how to make those decisions without it being based on rules. Then we take that mindful eating cycle and we modify the specific information based on the challenges. So diabetes, obviously, we're going to focus more on carbohydrates and those kinds of things when we're talking about the what section. But why you're eating is still the primary important thing. Now, binge eating is a little different, though, because binge eating is an eating disorder. And when people are struggling with binge eating, and we're not talking about the occasional binge with the girlfriends on a Saturday night, that sort of thing. We're talking about a pattern of secret eating an amount of food that's definitely larger than one would eat ordinarily, that kind of thing, on an ongoing basis. So binge eating creates a tremendous amount of suffering, and unfortunately, people who struggle with binge eating often think that there's, this lack of willpower, lack of control. And so many times they or their doctors or somebody else will prescribe dieting for that problem. Well, dieting, because of the eat, repent, repeat cycle that we were talking about earlier, dieting actually makes binge eating worse for most people. They will do better for short periods of time, but the restriction and deprivation actually become an emotional trigger for eating. The guilt that follows becomes an emotional trigger. And so we really, in order to treat binge eating disorder and even emotional eating, we have to start recognizing the connections between why I'm eating, when I feel like eating, what I'm eating, how much I eat, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really about making those connections.
What I love about what you teach, and also because you had mentioned emotional eating, and I'd like to talk about what you feel the definition of it is. I interviewed Dr. Roger Gould, who's considered an expert in emotional eating and wrote the book Shrink Yourself. But what I like about both of your guys' programs is that anyone can do it regardless of their diet style, because you're not really telling them what to eat. So you don't have to, like you say, have rigid rules. If people eat differently, they can still implement what you're teaching.
Absolutely. And I think that flexibility is actually essential. If we're going to make a sustainable change in our life, it has to be something that is realistic and doable and fits in with our lifestyle and our preferences and our heritage and all of these other things. That's not to say that we adopt one eating plan that works for us now and it stays the same. What really happens for most people is there's an evolution. There's this process of change that takes place, again, from the inside out as we become more mindful, not just of the food as we eat it, but how we feel afterward and how food affects us, and we lose that guilt and that restriction. We finally start to think, gosh, I could eat whatever I wanted, but I really want to feel good. Ultimately, eating the right amount of food isn't about being good, it's about feeling good. And it doesn't feel good to finish the whole package, right?
Right. Do you think if you become more mindful in one area, it translates into other areas? Because it seems like mindfulness is being taught in other places now, like, people with IBS, they're teaching them mindfulness to help that condition. Do you think it's just sort of just something that we could all benefit from in all areas, not just in our
I really do. I really do. It's been amazing. In fact, I just got back. I led a 5-day retreat, and 30 people were there, and we were talking about this exact topic, about perhaps maybe our struggle with food is where the door is most open. But as you learn mindful eating principles, you begin to learn mindful living principles.
Yeah.
So that it begins to translate into many, many other areas. We're going to see more and more mindfulness. I think it has a lot of power to help us change things that really have become really quite stuck for many of us. So,
do you think the technology plays a role in the fact that people really aren't mindful? I mean, it just seems there's so many, all these things. It's one thing. We had the internet, and then there's internet, and then Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest and Periscope, and people are tweeting and texting and all that stuff. I don't text, and people get mad at me because they say they sent me a text. Well, I don't. I have a flip phone. I can't get or receive text because when I'm not home, I don't want you bothering me. Not you. I mean, but you know what I'm saying.
I know.
But do you think
so technology is a piece of it, but I think it's important to recognize that as human beings with really quite advanced brains, our brain wants to hijack us, and our brains are just like your heart is an organ that beats and pumps blood, and your lungs breathe. Your brain thinks. That's its job. And so mindfulness is not about stopping the thinking, but it's about recognizing that you're thinking and what you're thinking about so that you can make a conscious decision about whether you want to board that train of thought or not. So from a technology standpoint, when we're multitasking like that, when we're eating and watching TV or eating and surfing the internet or eating and driving. Here's the problem. Our brain cannot focus on more than one thing at a time. We can do lots of different things at the same time, but we can only focus on one thing. If I've eaten pepperoni pizza 1,000 times in my life, but I'm watching a brand new episode of whatever on TV, my brain is very quickly going to be engaged by the television, and I can eat the rest of the pizza almost without thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, mindfulness is about awareness that I'm not really present for what's happening right now. So you can get to the end of a couple of slices of pizza or even salad. It doesn't matter how healthy or whatever the food is that you're eating. You can get to the end but really have no clear memory of consuming it. And so you have this desire for more because you never were really present for it. And to tie that back to your question about how it affects the rest of our lives, how often are we living our lives that way too? We're maybe having a conversation with our partner or a child, and the TV's on, or we're checking texts or surfing the internet or reading emails. You're not engaged in that moment in that relationship, and so it's a very unsatisfying way to live. When we're present, we can create that connection.
It's so weird. Like, you'll go to people's houses, let's say a mother, father, and 2 kids, and like all 4 of them will be on their technology. And like, instead of like, we used to play like Monopoly, my family, and now it's like this is what families do. Is they're all on their on their technology. I mean, they're sitting together in a room, but they're really not interrelating in any way.
That's exactly right, and that's a big challenge. And of course, if you're for many people, you mentioned emotional eating. For many people, the lack of connection, the lack of emotional connection with other people, the lack of authentic relationships can be one trigger for emotional eating. And so that's another way that technology can separate us from a healthy relationship with food if we're reaching for food to fill those holes.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So when did you become interested in mindful eating, and where did you actually learn it?
Well, that's a funny question because I, as I mentioned, had struggled with food and my body image since I was really even a preteen. And I was in my medical practice and hearing the same kinds of things from many of my patients. So it was sort of, in one way, it was kind of comforting to know that I wasn't alone, but it was horrifying to realize that here I was, a doctor, here this person was the vice president of a company, here's one with 4 kids running a household. We're smart people, and yet we're having a lot of difficulty managing our eating permanently. And so I thought, gosh, maybe there's not something wrong with me, but maybe diets themselves don't work. And at that time, I'd been dieting for years and years and years. Around that same time, I had a couple of small children, and I would watch how natural and effortless and joyful their relationship was with food.
Mm-hmm.
They would sit down in a high chair, and they'd put their hands into the food, and they would touch it, and they would smell it, and they would taste it, and they would eat until they'd had their fill, and then they were done. I don't care how good the food was. When they were done, and they wanted to go play. And I just thought, all these years of all this dieting, and all I can think about is food and not eating food.
Mm-hmm.
And here are these amazing, perfect little creatures who have this perfect relationship with food. And I really could see right then and there that there was a complete disconnect, and something had gone wrong between the time I was born, because I was pretty sure I had probably started out the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Something had gone wrong, and I needed to get back to that. So it was really, the first step was to just stop dieting and to realize that rule-based system of eating was not working for me. And maybe it works for some people, obviously not very many, but it wasn't working for me. And then learning this process of healing that relationship with food. I wasn't even calling it mindful eating until just a number of years ago, because to me it was just such a natural, instinctive way of eating. It just made so much more sense, and it worked so much better.
Well, you do talk about that in your book. You talk about instinctive eating. How is that different from mindful eating, and how do we relearn this kind of instinctive eating, like you talk about with your children?
hmm So, instinctive eating is that natural way that each of us was born to manage our eating effortlessly. So, eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're satisfied, enjoying the food that you eat, and then using the energy you've consumed to live and grow and explore and play, and not thinking and talking about food all the time in between. Mindful eating is the pathway to return to that instinctive state. But you can also eat mindfully and use that mindful eating awareness to start to understand your emotional connections with food and to begin to heal other issues around food and health and other kinds of things. So mindful eating is really the pathway. Um, I know some people who eat instinctively, who eat naturally and according to hunger and fullness, but they still perhaps could benefit from more awareness of what they're putting into their body. Or they could still benefit from more awareness about how they move their body, for example. So mindful eating, I find, can be beneficial no matter who you are. I think it really can help increase your awareness about how you're making decisions and ultimately improve your relationship with food and with other people.
Hmm. You talked a little bit about your kids, and one of the things you said in your book, which I thought was interesting, because a lot of my listeners do have children and they're always looking for ways to feed them healthier, is you said that it's not really good to use food as a reward for children or make them clean their plates. Would you talk about that a little bit? Because I know that that's exactly, I'm 55 and a half years old, and if we didn't clean our plates, we couldn't get dessert. And of course, dessert. So.
Right. Well, it's interesting because you talked before about some of the things that might have gone wrong in our culture, and I think there's actually many things that have created this perfect storm of challenges. And one of them is something that none of us could have ever controlled, and only through awareness and mindfulness can we be aware of the effect it's having on us today, just as you said. And that is that many of our parents were raised by parents who lived in a time of scarcity, World War II or other situations when there really was not food on every corner, on every desk, in every possible place you could go. You didn't have food available to you. So there was a time when it made sense to clean your plate. There was a time when it was so important to get those nutrients in that parents would reward with dessert in order to do that. But we don't live in scarcity anymore. We live in an abundant food environment. So the messages that we learned from our parents who learned it from their parents no longer apply. So we unwittingly pass them on to our kids. Clean your plate or you don't get dessert. And what we're teaching them is a number of things. Number one is that when we bribe them to clean their plate and bribe them with dessert, we're subconsciously sending the message that what's on your plate is the yucky stuff and the dessert is the reward. Well, we don't want to send that message. We, in Am I Hungry, we believe that all foods can fit into a balanced diet, and we don't want to make foods good and bad and place value on certain foods. So cleaning the plate also sends the message that I know more than you do about how much food your body needs right now. Now, I may not know that you had a banana for a snack this afternoon. I may not know that you're coming down with something. I may not know that you've been really active or inactive and you don't need that amount of food that I put on your plate. So when a parent makes the child clean the plate that they fixed, they are disconnecting that child from their instinctive ability to know how much their body needs. And then, of course, the final message here is, and if you eat all the food I gave you, no matter how full you are, I am going to reward you by giving you more food.
Yeah.
It's a real problem, right?
Boy, I wish she could have been around, growing up, because I think that's what contributed to me being obese as a child, was having to clean my plate and ignore those hunger signals just to get, like you say, the better food, the cake, the dessert.
Exactly, exactly. And so this is another place where, yes, we can't go back and relive our childhoods, but with mindfulness, when we become aware of, well, now, wait a minute. So why am I feeling compelled to finish off this food right now? Why do I feel like I have to eat everything that's here? I'm already full, or I'm already content or comfortable. What's going on here? And so that awareness that, what's happening? Why do I want to do this? Actually opens the door for a new decision. It gives us the chance to say, you know what? Food is not scarce anymore. It is wasting food to eat more food than my body needs. I'm not saving any starving children in any country by eating food that my body doesn't need, and then reparenting ourselves, reworking those old messages so that we don't continue to act out those old behaviors.
Mm. That's very helpful. Thank you, because I see this going on a lot with parents, and like I say, I was raised this way too, and that's very helpful. How uniquely American do you think is this problem? I mean, I do travel quite a bit to other countries to speak, not to every country, but it seems like in some countries they have a better handle on this, and that they truly are paying more attention to this mindful eating concept.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to me because I think America once again has been the leader in this, and not in a positive way up to this point. Unfortunately, more and more, many countries are struggling with many of the same issues that we have. And if I could say, I think, and this is probably not conventional belief system, and it may not even be compatible with your viewpoint, but I'm going to say it anyway because I do think it's important that we understand that the more restrictive we get about eating, the more parents talk about good foods and bad foods, the more we make foods forbidden and special by the process of avoiding and restricting and depriving, especially if those are foods we really love, the more power we give over those foods. And so, unfortunately, I think another driver of the challenges that we have here in the United States is the fact that we have also been dieting and restricting for 40 or 50 or 100 years. And the more we restrict, you would think, if it works, you would think people would be getting healthier, but they're not. They're struggling more. And I think that that's a hidden driver for overeating. That guilt and deprivation is part of this whole emotional cycle of overeating. Unfortunately, many other countries look at the United States and say, oh my gosh, look what's happening to us. We're going to end up like the United States. And so they're dieting and restricting even more. And parents are doing it to their children. And I think, unfortunately, they're going to push the path down the same direction as the U.S. has gone because of that piece that oftentimes people really aren't aware of.
Right. You said something interesting in the book, that people who struggle with food are usually food suggestible. Could you talk a little bit about that concept? Because I found that very interesting.
Well, I think all of us by nature are food suggestible because we're, at our core, we're animals. I want to say I did talk about animals after all. At our core, we are animals. And so having food within eyesight, or the smell of food, the awareness that food is nearby, creates this desire for that food. So that's food suggestible. We think we're hungry just because we saw food. People who struggle in their relationship with food and struggle with overeating oftentimes are even more highly food suggestible. And so keeping food on the counter or in the drawer at work, or using food as decoration in their home, like candy dishes and things like that, really is difficult for people like that. On the other hand, people who eat instinctively, oftentimes they're the very people who will leave a half of a candy bar sitting on their desk, and it can sit there all day long while everyone else is walking by thinking, why aren't you eating that? It's very interesting that you start to see this difference in the way that people behave around food depending on their relationship with food, and how whether food scarcity and deprivation or attraction to food for emotional reasons is playing a factor for them.
Yeah. Yeah. You had said something in your book, and I thought it would be a great refrigerator magnet or bumper sticker to put on the fridge, was this: if I'm not hungry, what I'm looking for is not in here. I thought that was brilliant, because it's really true, because I always tell my clients that if hunger isn't the problem, then food is not going to be the solution.
Exactly. It's so true. And this is and we actually do suggest that people make a sign for their refrigerator, exactly that. If I'm not hungry, what I need isn't in here. And here's the interesting thing about this, is that when we reach for food to meet other needs, not only do we have a bottomless pit because those needs aren't being met, here's the real problem: we're not really meeting our needs. So if you think about it this way, of course, we all want to focus on the food, and people want to lose weight, and they want to focus on that. But I'm just going to say that really the big challenge is that if you're a person who uses food to soothe stress and fill loneliness and suppress anger, or deal with boredom, because after all, eating is something to do, right?
Sure.
If you're a person who reaches for food for all those reasons, then your life becomes very small. Like you said, every problem, food is the answer or the solution. And so now we're not dealing with stress. We're not making connections with other people. We're not having enough fun or sweetness or pleasure in our lives. And so ultimately, we're not really meeting our true needs in a positive or balanced way. And so food becomes too important, and the rest of our needs go unmet. And I really ultimately think that that's the biggest problem that those of us who've struggled with food really have to deal with, because I want a big, vibrant life. I want to eat the foods that I love. I want food to provide enjoyment and fun and connection with other people. And I want to use that energy to go out and live a big, vibrant, happy life where food isn't my main friend, my main source of all pleasure and distraction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, because you said that when you eat for reasons other than hunger, the pleasure or distraction is short-lived, and the underlying trigger is still present, and then the eat, repent, repeat cycle continues. So that does make a lot of sense, that people have to get in touch with that, not just what they're eating, but why they're eating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it's easy. It is a simple concept. It's not always easy, and sometimes it's a process. We want that quick fix. People want you to tell them what to do and what to eat. I'm going to make this all better. But we already know that type of an approach is very ineffective in the long run, and ultimately we've got to get to the core issues of what's going on. Not that everybody has deep, dark issues with food. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of us have just learned habits. Does the name Pavlov ring a bell? Right?
Yeah. Here we are talking about dogs again.
Here we are.
That's okay.
We're just so habitual about it, though, that if you go to a baseball game and you eat a hot dog, then every time you do that, then every time you go to the baseball game, you want the hot dog. Sometimes it's just about saying, okay, what are these food-mood connections? Who are the people that I eat certain foods with? What's actually going on? And ultimately, a important piece of mindfulness is curiosity. It's not about, oh, I'm bad, I shouldn't do that. It's about, well, that's interesting. I wonder why I do that. That's interesting. Where did that come from? That's interesting. How come I'm doing this again, even though I didn't want to? So curiosity and gentleness and non-judgment allow us to make change, whereas guilt and beating ourselves up and postponing our lives until we feel like we deserve it, those are the things I think that ultimately keep us stuck.
you talk a little bit about preventive eating in your book and how it doesn't work. And I know that I often used to eat not because I was hungry, but because I was afraid I was going to be hungry at another time and maybe I wouldn't be able to find appropriate food. So, can you talk a little bit about that concept of preventive eating?
I think it's a really important concept, and I think it's something that many, many people struggle with, like you mentioned. Here's the interesting thing. Let's take it away from food for a minute and think of it in a different way to see if it helps us understand what's going on. Many of us have worked in an office, or we've been to places where it's super cold, especially if you're a female, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you know that you're going to be in a meeting at, let's say, 1 o'clock, and it's going to be super cold in that room, you wouldn't put your coat on at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, right? That's like trying to prevent coldness that hasn't come yet.
Or
and
like
so
trying,
for the
yeah.
two or
Yeah.
What's
or like,
that?
I was going to say, like filling a full tank. Your car gas is full of your gas tank's full, but you try to put more in because you're going to take a long trip.
Exactly. You just can't prevent hunger that hasn't come yet, really. So you end up feeling uncomfortable for that period of time when you've eaten and you weren't really hungry.
Yeah.
So preventive eating doesn't work because you're not taking care of that need very well.
Mm-hmm.
So a really easy way to address that fear of getting hungry at an inconvenient time is to keep a small amount of food with you, something as simple as a handful of almonds that you always have in your purse or your briefcase or your car. You know that if an emergency comes up, you can't get food, you've got enough food to stave off hunger for an hour or two, and you'll be fine. And oftentimes it's just, we don't leave the house with a baby without food for that baby to eat if we're going to be gone for a long period of time, and we shouldn't be leaving the house without food for ourselves.
Sure, I
that
agree
prevents us from overeating at a different time, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And people seem to be so afraid of being hungry. I work part-time at a medically supervised therapeutic water fasting center, and people go without food for 42 days. So most of us could go an hour or two without food, and we'd probably be okay,
We probably would be okay. Most of us have done enough preventive eating in our lives that we've got fuel to survive on for a period of time.
Exactly.
But, I'll tell you, it's kind of interesting to keep coming back to the challenge that restrictive eating creates, is that fear of being hungry actually will drive more overeating. There was a good article in the New York Times about this that Gary Tubbs wrote that talks about, what we know about fasting and hunger and some of these things. And so if a person is really struggling with that, I think it's important to start to understand that physiologically, biologically, when we're overly hungry, our body, every biology and psychology drives us to look for food and see food and experience hunger more powerfully because our body thinks we're starving to death.
Yes.
And it does not like that, right?
Right.
So for the average person, if it's not a religious practice or even just dieting and restriction, it really does make you think about food more than you were before, right?
That would make
natural.
Sense. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You say in your book that cravings are not hunger, and I completely agree with that because from my experience and with my clients that when you're truly hungry, pretty much any food will satisfy your hunger. But when it's more like an emotional eating, then you need a specific food. So if cravings are not hunger, what are cravings exactly?
So cravings can be for a specific type of food or a specific flavor, texture, temperature. We can crave very specific types of things that we want to eat. And you can have cravings when you're hungry. So it could be that you're hungry and you're really hungry for a specific food. And we have kind of this 4 really test that we talk about. If you really, 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 really want a particular food and you don't eat it, it's highly likely that you will eventually get around to eating that food, or that you may eat a lot of other foods that you didn't particularly want. So I think it is important to pay attention to the strength of your cravings. On the other hand, when a craving doesn't come from hunger, eating doesn't satisfy it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we find ourselves craving comfort foods, for example, or craving foods that we associate with pleasure or distraction or other kinds of things. And so it's important to say, gosh, I really want this particular food, but I'm not hungry at all. And if you offered me an apple, I wouldn't even be interested in it, to help us really understand that, gosh, sometimes this is not about the food at all anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because, I find it like people, it's really funny because, at this place that I work at True North in Santa Rosa, that we were at a culinary demo, and we were full. She made this amazing dish with potatoes and beans and corn and guacamole and salsa, and we were really, really full. And so she said, the teacher, Lori, said, would anybody like another? And we're like, oh no, gosh, we are so full, we couldn't eat another bite. And then she brings out a carrot cake, and she goes, does anybody want a piece of carrot cake? And all the hands went up, and she said, but I just asked you a second ago if you wanted more with this potato dish, and you all said they were full. So I thought, we must have another stomach for where dessert is concerned, because it seems like that when something hyper palatable like that comes out, it's like it doesn't even matter that it's weird, like, because we all said 40 people said we were full, and within 5 minutes when something better came out, it's like, where did that fullness go?
Right. And that's another really great example of how mindfulness can be so helpful to you. And with experience, you can begin to understand that about yourself. So my grandmother used to say, save room for dessert, right?
Yeah.
So what I find is really helpful, and actually at our retreat this last week, I did exactly this. I know they have fabulous, very, wonderfully prepared, homemade, and generally, not over the top kind of desserts. So I looked at the menu and I said, can you bring that dessert menu too? Because what they usually do, and what many restaurants do, is they bring the dessert menu after you've already had your meal. That just doesn't make sense. Look at the dessert menu at the beginning, or don't bother looking at it at all, because we are food suggestible, like you said earlier.
Sure. Well, that's, when you think about, commercials, I mean, people that, commercials can get people to go eat something just because of the commercial, the cues.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's an important thing to be aware of. So we talk in Am I Hungry? Well, let me take it back to a very specific strategy that you can play with and see whether it helps you. Whenever you feel like eating, by pausing and asking the question, am I hungry? You have the opportunity to start to notice, is this a need for fuel, or is this some other need? Is this a craving for pleasure, or am I bored? Am I stressed? What's going on here? Is it just lunchtime? So whenever you feel like eating, pause and ask the question, am I hungry? Which is pretty much the equivalent, to use the car analogy you talked about earlier, it's pretty much the equivalent of checking your fuel gauge before you pull into the gas station, right?
Yeah,
That's pretty obvious. Yet oftentimes we're not taking that important step of seeing where our own fuel gauge is before we eat. If you're not hungry at all, then it's a real door opener to say, okay, well, why do I want to eat? Is this just an environmental trigger? I saw somebody eating. I saw the commercial. I was watching a cooking show. What's going on environmentally that's triggering this? If it's nothing environmental, is it something emotional? Is it boredom or stress or loneliness or some other habit connection to eating at that particular time of day, at late in the evening, that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
So this awareness of what's actually driving your eating allows you to begin to start making connections that you can begin to address, because after all, that's what really ultimately will change the way that you eat in the long run, is if you change those patterns and beliefs around food.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Because you say in your book that wanting to eat isn't the same as needing to eat. So it would make sense that if you want to eat but you're not hungry, just saying the question, well, am I hungry, that at least you're taking a moment to acknowledge, maybe what you are
Mhm.
feeling. I find that so
Mhm.
many people, Michelle, that are emotional eaters, they almost don't want to know why they're eating emotionally because I think they're afraid that if they really sit down and think about why they feel bad, they'll, it might be too painful. So it's just easier to eat than to acknowledge what's really going on with them.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's a tough situation. So sometimes what we really need is the support of somebody who knows how to help us work through that. So, for example, we have an emotional eating and binge eating retreat coming up in November, and ultimately, yes, it's scary to begin to look at why we're doing what we're doing. But the truth is that we get stuck in patterns and we think there's no way out. I promise you that with the appropriate help, with the new tools, with new ways of thinking about these things, you can heal your relationship with food and with your body, because
Mm-hmm.
this is the work that we've been doing for 16 years. People will say to us, "Oh my gosh, I thought I was addicted to fill in the blank. I thought I could never eat certain foods in moderation. I thought that for the rest of my life I would be stuck on a diet." And I never imagined what was possible. So if you're feeling stuck in your life, that doesn't mean that there's necessarily something wrong with you. It just means that you have not yet found a way of addressing these issues that really work. Don't give up. I tell you, the freedom and the joy that can come from a healthy relationship with food, from learning how to eat what you love and love what you
Mm-hmm.
eat, and meeting your other needs in more effective ways, is so powerful. It frees up your energy to go out and do things that really do bring you joy and things that you uniquely are on this planet to do. And as
Mm-hmm.
long as you stay stuck in that love-hate relationship with food, or you make your whole life about food or not eating food, ultimately you're not really using your energy in the way that food is intended to to give you energy to do.
Do you think this is more of a female problem than a male problem, or do you see it across the board?
We see it across the board. Well, for example, binge eating disorder affects men in a much higher percentage than other eating disorders. The truth is that men are less likely to seek help for it. They're less likely to reach out and
Ah.
ask somebody for help. The
Mm-hmm.
irony of that, though, is that the mindful eating cycle is actually a very cool, logical way of thinking and making decisions. And so when men do connect with it, they find that it's actually quite an easy process. It seems to really help them very quickly because it just makes sense. It works the way their brains work. So unfortunately, I think oftentimes men may not relate to these kind of softer approaches, and may not think that it's something they need to be getting help with. But in fact, they'll do quite well, and oftentimes will do quite well quickly if they, again, just open themselves to asking for that help.
Sure, that would make sense. I run something called the Ultimate Weight Loss Program, and I find that when people drink alcohol, like, and I mean like every single day, and have to have it, it seems to affect their ability to lose weight. And you say in your book that we should be aware of the effects of alcohol on our ability to eat mindfully. Why do you think that is? Is it because it just makes it harder to make good choices, or is there something about it that it's just too calorically dense? What do you think the reason for that is?
Well, I think for many of us, it will decrease or disinhibit us. So we're not on, our brain isn't online. So moderate alcohol use, a glass of wine or two, here and there may not be as much of an issue. But if you're out with friends at happy hour and the next thing you know, you've had 2 or 3 drinks and somebody suggests ordering another appetizer or whatever it is, you may not really be connecting with your own hunger and satiety levels. So I think it's something, and then you can tell by the way that that's worded in the book that I'm really saying, hey, be aware of your relationship with food and alcohol and how that affects you.
Mm-hmm.
it's just really, again, about an awareness. It's not about do or don't. It's notice and then make decisions based on what you notice.
Mhm. That sounds good. So you've talked a little bit about, or didn't talk about them, but you mentioned these retreats. So tell me a little bit about them. How often do you have them? Where are they? What do you do at them? And how can people find out more about them?
Oh gosh, it's one of my favorite activities. I absolutely love it because it allows me to work intensely with a small group of people in a really amazing environment. So we do them several times a year. We have a general mindful eating retreat. That's the one that we just finished. Most often we do that at a resort in southern Utah where there's amazing hiking, amazing food, other activities. It's really beautiful. So it really supports that kind of transformational thinking that we're after. The one that I have coming up in November is specifically for emotional eating and binge eating. We'll go through the mindful eating cycle. We'll learn all the structure of that, but I also bring a therapist who's been trained in our binge eating program so that she, in addition to everything else that we do, she also runs a few small group therapy sessions so that people can go a little deeper with some of the issues that have been tripping them up over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we do them. If people are interested, just go to amihungry.com and you'll see a tab at the top that says Learning Options, and click on the one that says Retreats. Or just put in the little search box on amihungry.com, put in retreats, and it'll pop up and you can find when the next ones are and how to connect with us around that. I don't like, miracle cures. I don't like that kind of approach to eating and food. But I have to say that I have had the great privilege of watching people transform before my very eyes in 5 days, come in feeling really scared and disgusted with themselves and almost hopeless about their relationship with food. And by the end of those 5 days, they leave transformed. They leave entirely different people. Send them back home to begin to practice it in the real world, and it's really quite amazing to see what happens to people in such a short period of time. Likewise, we offer these programs. They're not all just retreats. We've trained mindful eating facilitators and therapists and coaches all over the world. So if you have somebody that you can connect with in your community, or if it's something that you want to train to do, you can learn to do these 8-week programs where you work with a group of people once a week for 8 weeks and really learn these strategies one step at a time. It's really quite amazing. Really professionally, I just feel so lucky to get to do this work and spread the word,
And so these 8-week programs are everywhere, all over the world. Are they online? Are they in person?
Yes, we have them available in both ways. We don't have nearly as many facilitators as we need for the number of people who are struggling with these issues. But if you can find somebody in your area, they lead live local workshops. We also offer programs for workplace wellness. We also have self-paced online programs. So again, if you go to amihungry.com and click on programs or learning options, you'll find all kinds of different ways that you can interact and learn these skills.
That sounds great. Do you speak anywhere other than doing the programs? Could people come see you somewhere, or is it just your?
Yeah, I speak anywhere that people invite me to speak. I speak at a lot of association and conferences and events. The next one that I have coming up is at the end of September in Chicago and one in Quad Cities. So if you go to my website, again, look at learning options, you'll see a list of upcoming speaking engagements. And then I'll be doing a little segment on Dr. Oz this month, September of 2015, about emotional eating as well. So
terrific. Do you know what the air date is yet? Because I do watch.
I don't have it. No, I don't have it yet. They told me September, so I'm keeping an eye out, and we'll post it, of course, in social media and on our website.
Congratulations. That's great. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you because I love what you said, especially about preventive eating, because I realize that makes no sense. But what do you do if you're just not hungry? Because I find myself in social situations where maybe people want to go out to dinner or they've invited me over, and I'm just not hungry. And if I eat, what do you do? What do you do? Can I just say, well, Dr. May says I'm not supposed to eat. I'm not hungry. I mean, but that does happen. I
Yeah.
can't understand how when we're in a group, whether it's a family or with friends, how can everybody get hungry at the same time?
It is really hard. Well, that's the amazing process with mindful eating. So if you know that you're going to be going out to dinner, or your family is going to be eating at a specific time, or there's a specific event, and if you've been eating mindfully for any period of time, you begin to understand what your own hunger rhythms are like. So if you know that, for example, dinner is going to be at 7 and you usually eat a snack at 4 o'clock, well, you're not going to eat a big snack at 4 o'clock because you won't be hungry by 7 o'clock. You begin to learn how to adjust what you eat and how much you eat so that your hunger rhythms actually match what else is going on in your life. So with more practice, you can actually not preventively eat, you can actually plan your eating so that you're hungry when you want to be.
Okay.
Sometimes it happens and you're at an event, you didn't expect this to go on, you didn't expect whatever happened, and the food comes out and you're not hungry. And at that point, then you decide, gosh, if I want to eat socially and have a couple of bites, and I'll be okay if I'm just, I've had a couple bites too many, it'll be fine. You can eat if you want to. We never said don't eat if you're not hungry, because that would be no different from any other diet rule. All we said was notice whether you're hungry or not, and then make a decision that works for you in that moment. You might say, hey, I'm not hungry right now, but I'm going to sit and chit-chat for a minute and see what happens. If in 30 minutes I'm hungry, then I'll eat, then I'll order.
Right. Terrific. One of the things I also like that you said in your book is that every urge to eat is an opportunity to become mindful of your hunger and fullness signals. And to me, that sort of encapsulates what mindful eating sort of is.
It's really about awareness, and every mistake that you make, every eating opportunity, every time you make a conscious decision, you are learning to eat mindfully. Even when you eat mindlessly and you notice it, you're mindful again.
That's right.
You've learned something.
That's true. It seems like, meditation would help with this. I don't know. How do you feel about meditation? Because to me, that's the next piece of the puzzle for me. That seems would, at least for me, feels like it would make me more aware of what's really going on around me.
Oh, it absolutely would. But I think a simple place for people to start who aren't interested in meditating yet is to do a body, mind, heart scan prior to eating. It's a form of a simple body meditation that allows you to connect with what's going on in this present moment. So even if I obviously would love it if everybody would take the time to meditate and connect with what's going on and begin to manage that brain that I talked about where the thoughts are going all over the place. But even if all you do is a body, mind, heart scan before you eat, that's a wonderful place to start. And, of course, that's included in the book, Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat, to learn how to do that and start connecting with what's going on in your body and in your mind and in your heart.
That's fantastic. One last question. You have a whole chapter on it, but it's about exercise. How important do you think that is in general?
Oh, I think as a retired family physician, I think physical activity is very important for overall health, regardless of weight, regardless of calories. And in fact, that's one of the things that I would suggest for everybody is don't use exercise as punishment for eating. Don't use exercise to earn the right to eat. Exercise is good for you. Eating well is good for you. And keep those two things separate and do them because you want to feel good in your body, not in order to exchange calories. I think that's one of the reasons that so many people struggle with exercise is because they feel guilty about the food that they eat, so exercise is punishment instead.
Right, yeah. And you can't out-exercise a bad diet anyway, so, That's great. Well, it's just really been a pleasure talking to you. I've learned so much. I really loved your book, Eat What You Love What You Eat. And if you'd like to find out more about Dr. Michelle May and her workshops and her work, please go to her website, www.amihungry.com. So thank you so much, Michelle, for being on Healthy Living. It was just fascinating hearing more about this subject, which I think is really, really important. And for many people, it would really help them a lot with the struggles with food.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, AJ, and I look forward to connecting with you again.
And I can't wait to see you on Dr. Oz. And thank all of you for listening to another episode of Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dr. May.